Hello, and welcome to Griffin Baptist Church's Bible Study. I'm Gary Wools. I will be the teacher. Today we're going to be looking at the book of Daniel, chapter 5. This will be the second session. In the first session, I stopped with verse 7. King Belshazzar had thrown a drunken party. The Medo-Persian army had surrounded Babylon. They were ready to enter the city and capture it. And we had seen a hand, or fingers of a hand, come and write upon the plastered wall of the throne room. Now with verse 8, in verse 7, Belshazzar had called all the wise men in to come and try to interpret this writing for him. In verse 8, then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Belshazzar knew the history of his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar, and he turned his back on the true God. But once again, the wise men failed to be able to make known the dream, just like they were unable to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. You would have thought the wise men would begin to see that the pagan gods did not help them, and remember how God of heaven helped Daniel. But a lot of people today cannot see the forest for the trees. They're not going to humble themselves and turn to God. Verse 9. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonished. Moments before, Belshazzar was laughing and drunk as a skunk, and now he has a look of terror on his face. No one had seen him this depressed or troubled before, and it's amazed them. Verse 10, now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house, and the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy countenance be changed. The queen spoken of here would have been the queen mother, Nebuchadnezzar's wife, and the mother of the daughter whose husband was Nabonidus. Someone, maybe one of the servants, must have told her what was taking place in the banquet hall. She was Belshazzar's grandmother, and she addressed him with the respect shown to the king. But she told him not to be troubled. Verse 11, there is a man in thy kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of thy father light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar thy father, the king, I say, thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. She told him there was a man in the kingdom that could interpret the writing on the wall. She remembered Daniel and how he had the spirit of the holy gods. Even though Nebuchadnezzar came to the saving knowledge of the God of heaven, this statement indicates that she did not. She still refers to the Most High God as one of the many gods they worship. Daniel had dropped out of public service by this time, but he still lived in Babylon. He had served as the president under Nebuchadnezzar and also was the master over the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. While she is telling Belshazzar, what she is telling Belshazzar is that Daniel demonstrated wisdom and understanding that was like the wisdom of the gods. Verse 12, for as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpretation of dreams, and showing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts, were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. I do not believe the queen I do believe the queen embellished a little bit on her description of Daniel's abilities. We've not been told he could interpret hard sentences or dissolve doubts. Daniel may have removed all doubts when he interpreted the dream found in chapter 4, where the tree was cut down, but I do not believe he dissolved any doubts. The queen calls Daniel by names in the verse. She uses both Daniel and his Babylonian name, Belteshazzar. She now uses Belshazzar. She urges Belshazzar to call Daniel, telling him that Daniel will show him what the writing means. Then was Daniel brought in before the king, and the king spake and said unto Daniel, Art thou that Daniel which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? Now the king questions Daniel to determine that Daniel is the one the queen had spoken of. I am sure that Daniel replied that he was the one and the same. Verse 14, I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. I like this statement, I have heard of thee. The queen had just filled him in as to who Daniel was and his abilities. Belshazzar did not know the God of heaven, nor did he have much regard for the captives. He was raised in a palace, but shows no knowledge of the one who interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. This makes one wonder what he was doing with his time that he did not know Daniel. The only reason he is called Daniel is so he can find out what was written. And once he finds out what it says, I don't think he really wanted to hear what the answer. Verse 15, And now the wise men and astrologers have been brought in before me, that they should read the writing and make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But they could not show the interpretation of the thing. Once again, the pagans failed to interpret the writing or the dreams. They do not have the spirit of the true God in them, so God's not with them. Verse 16, And I have heard of thee that thou canst make interpretations and dissolve doubts. Now if thou readest the writing and make known unto me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Now the king flatters Daniel, and promises to reward him if he can make known the writing. Daniel was getting on up in age. He would have been in his 80s by now, and must have been set aside when Nebuchadnezzar died. He could care less about the rewards promised by Belshazzar. After all, he had been the second in command under Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 17, Then Daniel answered and said before the king, Let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another, yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation. Daniel did not need the gifts, nor did he want to get involved in Belshazzar's government. I'm sure that he had seen the writing on the wall when he came into the hall and already knew what it said. Knowing what it said, he also understood what was going to happen to the king. Verse 18, O thou king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, and majesty, and glory, and honor. Daniel tells this upstart that God had given a kingdom to Nebuchadnezzar, and he was the absolute ruler of the kingdom. Notice Daniel does not flatter the king like his grandmother had. Daniel does not tell him to live forever. In effect, Daniel is telling Belshazzar, you're not even a real king. You're only using the title. Verse 19, And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him, whom he slew and whom he would he kept alive, and whom he would he set up, and whom he would he put down. The God of heaven had made Nebuchadnezzar the absolute ruler over the entire known world. Daniel seems to be mocking Belshazzar because he tells him that everyone trembled and feared Nebuchadnezzar. Apparently, Belshazzar did not instill much fear in anyone. It didn't seem to bother Daniel to speak up to this young upstart. Verse 20. But when his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beast, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like the oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruleth in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whoever he will. Verse 22, And thou his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, thou knowing all this. As I said, Belshazzar was really the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel may have referred to him as Nebuchadnezzar's son because his mother carried on the bloodline, not his father. Daniel now witnesses to Belshazzar and tells him, I'm not telling you anything that you didn't already know. Belshazzar was not of the bloodline of the family of Nebuchadnezzar, only through his mother. His dad was not. He was the son-in-law. I'm sure the events described in 21 had been talked about in the family at some point. They should have known it. Like many today, Belshazzar didn't think it applied to him. He didn't need God. Verse 23, But hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before thee. And thy lords and thy wives and thy concubines have drank wine in them. And thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone, which see not, hear not, nor know, and the God in whom hand has thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. Now Daniel tells Belshazzar his spiritual condition and the great sin he has committed. You have to turn your back on the true God. You have turned your back on the true God and used his holy vessels in the worship of your pagan gods. Your gods are just material things that cannot speak, see, or hear. They have no knowledge, and they cannot save you. During the time of the judges, the Philistines captured the ark and took it to the house of their pagan god Dagon. I'm going to read a passage found in 1 Samuel chapter 5, and we will see how this pagan god responded to the presence of the Ark of the Covenant. 1 Samuel chapter 5, verse 1. And the Philistines took the Ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer unto Ashdod. And the Philistines took the Ark of God and brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. And when they of Ashdod arose early on the morrow, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. And they took Dagon and set him in his place again. And when they rose early on the morrow morning, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the ground, behold, before the ark of the Lord. And the head of Dagon and both palms of his hands were cut off upon the threshold. Only the stump of Dagon was left to him. Verse 5, Therefore neither the priest of Dagon, nor any that came into Dagon's house, tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod unto this day. Even in the days of the Philistines, the pagan gods could not stand before the true God. The pagan gods that the Babylonians worshipped would have had the same reaction if put in the same circumstances as Dagon was. God punished the Philistines, and he is going to punish those in Babylon, and he will punish the people of today that do not turn from their idols. Verse 24. Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and the writing was written. Daniel has preached a pointed sermon to Belshazzar and all that's present. I doubt anyone listened to this old man because they did not understand he was preaching about God and their doom. Once a person reaches a point of no return, God puts calling on that person. It would seem that Belshazzar and probably all present have reached that point. I still believe the part of the hand belonged to Jesus. Verse 25, and this is the writing that was written. Meneth, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Meneth, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Mean is repeated, and when something is repeated in the Bible, it is important, and we should listen to what is being said. God tells Belshazzar twice that he has numbered Babylon and it is finished. There is an old saying, your number is up, or his number is up. The expression certainly applies here. His number is up. If America is not careful, we may fall into the same dire straits if we haven't already. Verse 27, Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and found wanting. Belshazzar, you have been weighed on the divine scale, and you did not measure up. They did not weigh enough, therefore they did not measure up to God's standards, so they were found wanting. Pisa, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. The head of gold will no longer rule the world. It is time for the arms and silver to take your place, is what Daniel's telling him. I am sure this was a shock to Belshazzar, who thinks Babylon cannot be captured. Verse 29, then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet and put a chain about his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him, that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. Belshazzar now makes good on his promise to reward the one that could read the writing. He does this even though he has been told his country would be divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Maybe he did not believe the interpretation, or was just foolish, because he goes ahead and makes Daniel the third ruler of Babylon. Of course, Daniel didn't hold this office very long. In a few hours, the Medes would march into the city and take it, thus ending the Babylonian reign. And in the night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. And Darius the Mede took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Verses 30 and 31 gives us an unabridged version of the fall of Babylon. Apparently there was a canal that branched off the Euphrates River and ran through the old city where the place was located. The Medo-Persian army diverted this canal back into the river and marched into Babylon under the steel gates that protected the city on a dry riverbed. The last two verses tells us the message that came true, and that very night, and Belshazzar was killed. Thus the end of Babylon, the Babylonian Empire, came to a very swift end. I hope you've enjoyed this study. I know it's went a little long, and I apologize, but I wanted to complete chapter 5. Bless you, and have a good day.